Can you see that?
Yeah.
Great. Okay, wonderful. Yeah. First thing I've done is to prove that I'm absolutely terrible at tech. Okay, so this is Publishing Up North, and on the next slide, got just a little bit of an intro into what we're going to be covering. I'll just do a little overview of the Northern publishing scene. Lots of people don't know just how vibrant the publishing scene actually is in the North, because it's actually a fairly recent thing. Publishing has traditionally been really dominated by London publishers, which was a problem and is part of the reason that we set up Harper North. Then I'll go into a little bit about what we're looking for at Harper North, and at this point I might wave to Alice, our head of marketing, who's here, and I'm sure she can answer any marketing or publicity related questions that anybody has later. Then I'll give a few of my top tips for how to submit your manuscript, including how to choose who to submit your manuscript to, as well as then how to do the perfect pitch, and a little bit about why manuscripts don't always get accepted for publication, and why that is not always, very rarely actually, a reason to give up writing and declare yourself a terrible writer, because the vast majority of the time that is not the reason why your manuscript gets rejected. And then I'll be open to any questions that you have. I'm sure there'll be lots of things that I don't cover or forget to cover, so please do ask me anything. So first of all, just wanted to take a moment to look at what does Northern fiction look like. As I say, I'm a fiction commissioning editor, but I'm aware there'll be writers of all different kinds of fiction, non-fiction, poetry in the room. Just out of interest, do shout at the end if you don't write fiction and you write other things, and if you have questions specific to that, I will do my very best to answer them. So this is just a selection of Northern classics. As you can see, Northern fiction can mean a lot of different things, from, you know, classic realism to horror, children's literature, and contemporary classics like Clockwork Orange, which is terrifying. Nowadays, Northern fiction also looks like a whole lot of different things. Sarah mentioned that a few people had sent in questions before the session about how Northern does my novel have to be to qualify as Northern. And as far as we're concerned at Harper North, we really want to publish the whole range of different Northern stories. And the North is not just one place, the North is not just one genre, and not one particular type of setting. So we're really interested in all the different kinds of stories that you're writing and that interest you across the commercial to literary spectrum, in crime, historical fiction, book club fiction, literary fiction, anything else that you can think of, really. Just out of interest, has anybody read any of the books on this slide? Feel free to unmute yourself if you can. People unmute themselves? No. Okay.
Please pop it in the chat.
Oh, great. Okay, great. So also, I just wanted to share this quote from Benjamin Myers that I really like. He wrote an article in The Guardian about what Northern writing is. And he says, the North is no more a cohesive whole than the South is, and is instead a series of interlocking territories, some of which remain bafflingly hugely overlooked and unrepresented in literature. I don't believe there is such thing as a regional writer, only writers who chose to illuminate the minutiae of their locale. As a reader, there's always a thrill in recognizing familiar territories in literature, and it's the writer's job to create alternative histories for these places. I love this quote because it just puts into words in a very clever way that Northern writers should be able to represent the North in any way that they like in fiction, and that's what we're all about at Harper North. I also just wanted to take a moment to, well, before we go into the actual Northern publishing scene, why the Northern publishing scene is so important. Until very recently, like I mentioned, the publishing industry was largely concentrated in London. Here's a quote from Arts Council England on a report that they did in 2017, in which they said all literary publishing is concentrated in London, the major publishers are in London, all but one of the Independent Alliance are in London, the newspapers and reviews are based in London, decisions made in London, which is quite depressing. A little bit later in 2019, The Guardian also did a report on people who work in the publishing industry, people who are making decisions about what books get published. And that obviously has a sort of knock-on effect on the kind of authors that get published. So in 2019, in this survey, the vast majority of people working in publishing were not from the north, 19.8% from the south east of England, 15% from London, east of England 12.5%. I class as in that category because I'm originally from near Peterborough. And then only 2% of publishing professionals were from the northeast, and even fewer from Scotland. Oh no, 6.8% from Scotland, 1.4% Welsh, 0.9% Northern Irish. So that's a problem that the industry is still grappling with, but I'm pleased to say that since 2019, the Northern literary scene has really been thriving more than ever. There were already some really incredible independent publishers on the scene and have been going for many, many years. This is not a complete picture on this slide of everybody working in books in the north. The north has always had a really sort of rich literary tradition, but in recent years, extra development agencies like this one, Northern Writers Studio, have appeared along with Muslim Writers North, some literary agencies as well. The Liverpool Literary Agency was set up relatively recently, and new independent publishers are also popping up relatively frequently. And Harper North, where Alice and I work, was launched in 2020. So this is a slide that makes me happy, and I hope it makes you happy too. And I'm going to segue now to talk a little bit about us. Our motto at Harper North is Books from the North for the World. And just to introduce a little bit to who we are and why we were established in March of 2020. Which wasn't very felicitous timing because it was right at the start of the pandemic. So we all started working remotely, and it's only relatively recently that we've all actually been able to come together in an office, and it's been amazing to actually spend some time together in person. We were established first and foremost to counter this underrepresentation of authors getting published from northern regions of the UK. And most of us are working at Harper North are Northern. I'm one of the odd ones out, in case you're wondering. So we our remit is specifically to, well, the vast majority of the authors that we publish are either from or resident in the northern half of the UK, to put it really, really broadly. So our geographical remit is actually massive and covers lots of different regions, and we're really keen to, like I said earlier, find voices from all different communities, all different genres and market areas across adult fiction and non-fiction. There are just a few genres of adult fiction that we don't publish purely because we don't have the editorial expertise in those areas. Those areas are at the moment sci-fi, fantasy, and erotica. But if you are interested in those genres, there are other publishers that we can point you to. So feel free to get in touch with us. Something that we're really, really proud of at Harper North is that we have an open submissions policy, which means that you don't need a literary agent to be published with us. Just check out our website for details about how you can submit fiction and non-fiction to us without a literary agent. We do reply to everybody eventually. It takes us quite a long time, so sorry in advance. But my brilliant colleague Meg mans the inbox and makes sure that everybody does get a response eventually. So as it says on the slide, we're here to offer a fresh and open way of working with writers, and an important part of our ethos is to be transparent and a little bit more accessible perhaps to writers who haven't been published before, to some of the other big, sometimes scary London publishers. We want to be a friendly face, and we want to do things like this and actually meet writers and answer questions wherever we can, to make sure that publishing doesn't feel like a sort of closed off bubble that is really difficult to understand. And when we do take on authors, we believe that our relationship with authors should always be a partnership, not a transaction. So we try to make sure our authors fully understand every part of the publishing process and are able to ask us questions along the way and really participate and feel like they're one of the gang. Our office is based in Manchester. There are 5 of us working in the Manchester office. That's our whole editorial department and Alice, who heads up marketing and publicity. We actually all live in different places across the north, which is really nice. I live in Sheffield, our editorial assistant Meg lives in Liverpool, and everybody else is sort of somewhere in between. So we're able to tap into our local communities of writers and then come together in Manchester to share our learnings and work together there. But because we're part of HarperCollins, which is one of the UK's biggest, I think it's the UK's 2nd biggest publishing group, we also have lots of colleagues in London in our sales department, production department, rights, audio, who we stay in touch with on a daily basis via email and Microsoft Teams, and wherever we can, we visit each other. So we're functioning just as another branch of HarperCollins. There are lots of other imprints of HarperCollins that are based in London, but we're doing exactly the same thing that they do in Manchester, which is really exciting. And we're the first division of one of those, the UK's 5 biggest publishing groups, to actually do that and have a publishing division based in North that's editorially focused on the North. Before I go into some tips on how to submit your manuscript, I just wanted to check in with just a super simplistic overview of how submissions work. I apologize, most of you probably know all of this already, but because you can't unmute yourselves, you're just going to have to listen to me drone on, so I apologize. How submissions work sometimes involves a literary agent, often it involves a literary agent. For anyone who doesn't know what a literary agent is, their job is to what we call represent writers, and that means that a literary agent will see talent in a writer and take them on to first develop their work. Usually a literary agent will edit your manuscript and give you advice and sort of whip the manuscript into shape until it's ready to be sent to a publisher. They will then go into their big pool of contacts. They'll know a lot of different publishers and individual editors, and they'll already have an idea in their mind of whereabouts in the market your book belongs and which editors are likely to want to read it. And then they'll pitch the book on your behalf to those editors and try and get them interested in making an offer. Then they will manage that process, that acquisition offers process, and negotiate contracts on your behalf. And then they'll sort of be your right hand woman or man, usually woman, because most people who work in publishing are women. Just being sort of constantly there to help you navigate the publishing process. If some authors work with multiple different publishers throughout their career, and the idea is that the agent will be the one constant person. Obviously, that's not always the case, because you might want to sack your agent and find a new one. But I think that pretty much covers the wonderful services that a literary agent can do. The literary agent, of course, requires payment for these services, and I think pretty much this. Oh, I've just noticed there's lots going on in the chat. I'm sorry that I have, if I've missed any questions, just let me know at the end. Yeah, so the standard is that a literary agent will take 15% of all of your earnings from your writing. Not every writer does want a literary agent. Some writers don't like being edited by multiple people, for example. Some writers prefer to keep that 15%. It's really, really about personal choice. And again, we can go into this if you have very specific questions about how to make that decision about whether you're better off having a literary agent or not. But whether, if you decide not to have a literary agent, the route to getting published is to submit to a publisher, and you're better off knowing which editor you're wanting to read your work. And then once an editor finds a manuscript that they really, really like, that is by no means the end of the process. We are not sort of all-powerful leaders within our publishing houses, and we have to make sure that the larger teams around us are equally excited about every manuscript that we want to publish. So when I receive a manuscript, either from a writer or a literary agent, and I fall in love with it, my job then is to take that manuscript to my wider team and discuss with them what our actual practical strategy for publishing the book would look like. Test the water to see if everybody actually likes it as much as I do, because if, for example, the sales department are not massively keen on a book, it's just not a good idea for the author to go with that publishing house, because at the end of the day they're going to be underserved if the whole team isn't really excited about it. I'll go into more of the minutiae of this later on, but just to let you know straight away that it's not all about the editor, because I think that behind the scenes part of the decision-making process can be quite mysterious if you are not well acquainted with the publishing industry. On to how to submit a manuscript. The number one rule, it's a really, it's going to sound silly, but always check the guidelines of the literary agency or publishing house that you're submitting to. A lot of literary agents are quite finicky about things as simple as the font or the size of the type that you use in your submission, but on a less sort of petty note, there will be guidelines on what actual materials they want you to submit, whether they want you to submit a synopsis separately to your pitch letter, whether they want to read a whole manuscript or just a sample, and if it's just a sample, how long does it have to be. It's really, really important to just check these things, because it's so easy to do, and it's always a real shame if that's the hurdle that doesn't get you noticed. So next, I think it's really important to be selective about who you are submitting your manuscript to, and be really sure in your mind about why you're actually submitting to that person. Literary agents always have a little biography on their website that tells you what kind of books they are really interested in, or that they're often a literary agent will put on their website, right now I really want to find XYZ, and they'll update that fairly regularly. And they'll also mention on their website things that they're not interested in, and it's just not worth your time submitting to agents who have already put on their website, I do not like exactly what you're writing. A lot of the decision-making process in that early stage is based on personal taste for a literary agent, so it's really worth just doing a little bit of research into what they're looking for, and also what other authors they're working with, and this goes for both literary agents. You can look at their client list on their website, or if you're submitting to a publisher like Harper North, you can look on the website. Again, there will always be information on a publisher's website about the remit that they publish in. If they don't publish certain types of books, they'll probably say so on their website, and it's a really good idea to not submit to a publisher who just doesn't publish the kind of book that you're writing. And it's also a really good idea to have a look at what other authors that publisher has published recently. If you go on Amazon, you can type in the name of a publisher, and lots of their books will come up in the search options. You can also often find catalogues for publishers online. If you just Google the publisher's name and the word catalogue and the year, often that's publicly available, and it's a really good resource for getting to know what kinds of books a publisher is interested in. And also, if you are writing in a certain genre and you know what a publisher has published in previous years, but you know that your book has a little something that they haven't had yet, it's a really, really great idea to put in your pitch. I think there's a gap in your list for what I'm writing, and this is why. In case that's a piece of jargon that's confusing, we use list to mean the particular selection of books or authors that a publisher or an editor looks after. Obviously, honing your pitch letter is massively important because it's your first impression, and first impressions count. And on the next slide, I've got some top tips for how to do this. So for me, the perfect pitch letter leads with a writer's best one-line pitch. And this is much easier said than done. I think a lot of writers actually leave that opening paragraph of their pitch letter till last. It's the last thing they write because it's the hardest bit to write. What I mean by leading with your best one-line pitch is boiling down the one biggest reason why people will need to read your book, the biggest reason they'll want to recommend your book to their friends, the main thing they'll take away, the experience they'll take away from having read it, how your book's going to make them feel. What I'd recommend you do is actually write a longer version of this, because there's going to be lots of reasons why people will want to read your book, and it will be quite difficult initially to narrow down which is really the one reason to lead with. And if you can just make that that paragraph shorter and shorter and shorter until you've really sort of condensed it to like the liquid gold that it needs to be, just to open that letter, and then you can go into those other reasons a little bit further down. And also I think it's really important when you're crafting this one-line killer pitch, you have to bear in mind that you're addressing somebody. When you're thinking about the number one reason why a person will want to read your book, you've got to imagine that that person is a complete stranger to you. They're not going to read it because they know you and love you, and they're not going to read it because they already know what happens at the end. It's got to be something that is going to appeal to people who don't already know the minutiae of the story. So that's the one-line pitch. On a more boring note, in that opening paragraph, you've got to be really specific and practical by just giving the person reading your pitch letter a helping hand in being able to very quickly identify what kind of book is this. Is it the kind of book that I actually work on? So it's always a good idea to state the genre, state the word count of the manuscript as well. Just so that the person reading your letter doesn't have to work really, really hard to understand in the most basic possible sense what kind of book you're submitting to them. Similarly to something I mentioned on the previous slide, it's always a good idea to tailor the letter to the recipient. Do a little bit of research about who you're writing to and which other authors they work with. Anything that you can find on the internet about the kinds of books that they're interested in. I'm now dreading potential future authors finding this video online and watching the whole thing so that they can refer to it in their pitch letters. You don't have to go that deep into it, and a lot of editors will be embarrassed at the thought of that, but it's always a good idea to know who you're writing to and why you're writing to that person, and why you really genuinely think that your book would be a good fit for that person's list. Also show that you've done a little bit of market research and that you have thought realistically about the audience that your book is for. That means going into a bookshop or searching the Sunday Times bestseller lists, browsing on the Kindle store or in supermarkets, wherever it is that you read books, or that you find books to read, and looking at books, identifying books that are in a similar genre to what you're writing, and figuring out which books and which authors you feel an affinity with. And if you were to just sort of close your eyes and picture your future #1 biggest fan, try and work out what is their favorite book now. They haven't read your book yet, but what is their favorite book now and why? And why is it that your book is actually going to be their next favorite book after they've read yours? So it's about working out which books your book would sit nicely alongside on a bookshop shelf, but it's also about allowing yourself the space to shine and pointing out in which ways your book is original as well. So a lot of people will say, my book is, I don't know, Girl on the Train meets Harry Potter. That's a really, really impossible situation. But if you were to pick 2 books, but never ever say my book is Girl on the Train meets Harry Potter, by the way, that is the easiest way to, to not get your book published. But you don't have to pick 2 books that are very similar to each other, but what you do have to do is you have to demonstrate why your book is like a certain book and why your book is different. And you can use qualifiers like my book has all the creepy atmosphere of a Stephen King novel, but it has the lyrical prose of some Booker Prize winning novelists as well. That's a much better example than the Harry Potter one. Also, okay, an important part of your pitch letter is to entice the reader, but also be concise. And what I mean there is, don't go into really, really excruciating detail about tiny little plot points in your book. I wouldn't recommend including an entire synopsis in your pitch letter. Often people will ask you to submit a synopsis separately from the pitch letter, because it's a lot easier, for me as an editor, it's a lot easier to read a concise, to the point note about why an author thinks that I should want to read their book, and then I can go into the nitty-gritty details about everything that happens in the book in a separate document. If you're not asked to do that separately, I would really recommend just including a very slimmed down synopsis, so the reader just doesn't get lost in all the detail before they've had a chance to decide if they really want to read the book or not. And lastly, introduce yourself in the letter, show a bit of your personality. We always like to hear a little bit about what inspired you to write, why specifically you decided to write this story, and just get a sense of who you are, a bit of your unique personality, and a bit of a sense of humour never goes amiss either. Right, on the next slide, just wanted to touch a little bit on reasons why not every novel gets accepted for publication. The obvious, it might not be obvious if you don't work in publishing, but a really big reason is that there just aren't enough editors and not enough publishing houses to publish all the novels that get written. We are a relatively small industry, and sadly we have to create enough space so that we publish the books that we do publish really well. If we took on loads and loads and loads of books, inevitably we would just end up not doing a good job on them. So that is one reason why all novels can't get published. But rather than I know it's really difficult to take rejections a lot of the time, especially because writing a book takes so long and it takes so much creative and emotional energy, and it can be really crushing to get a no after you put in all of that effort. But it's really not that you are the problem. It's not that you are a bad writer. It's not that your novel is bad the vast majority of the time. It can be that it's the wrong editor, it can be that it's the wrong publisher, and it can be that it's the wrong time. By wrong editor, first of all, it could be that you've written to an editor or a literary agent whose personal taste just doesn't click with the book that you've written. It could also be that that person doesn't have capacity to take you on. I, at the moment, have capacity to publish about 8 books a year, but I receive about 8 submissions a week. So that gives you a bit of an insight into just how picky I need to be with the manuscripts that I decide to take forward. It's just not possible for us to take on loads and loads of books, partly because we really want to do our absolute best by the books that we do publish, and partly because in publishing we work very long hours and we don't really read during the day, so we've got to make sure we've got time on the evenings and weekends to get through our submissions pile and make sure that we are still sane enough to do right by our authors. It can also be a question of vision or area of expertise. Sometimes I read a submission that I really enjoy, but I'm just scratching my head and thinking, but how can I actually get that book into readers' hands? How can I convince members of the public to buy it? How can I package it? What would the cover look like? I've got no idea. And in those situations, I'm not the right editor for the book, and it would be doing a disservice to the author for me to publish it, because I would do it wrong and not very many people would buy copies. So that is often a reason why we turn down. It's the classic, it's not you, it's me, but it's genuinely true in a lot of situations. So the reason I've put wrong editor and wrong publisher in different columns is, first of all, because sometimes an editor really, really loves the manuscript, but nobody else in the publishing house does. It's a really sad situation, but a lot of the time it is a question of group taste, not just individual taste. And it's really important, like I think I mentioned earlier, that everybody in the publishing house, from the sales department, marketing, publicity, rights, that everybody is agreed that that this is a book they're really, really excited to work on. So sometimes it's just a question of not getting enough votes in-house. Remit is a really, really important aspect as well. Sometimes a book just isn't quite the right genre or market area. This is something that you can often avoid by paying attention to the guidelines on the website and making sure that you're submitting to the right publishers. Inside competition and resourcing is also often a reason why we decide not to take on certain books. If we are already publishing a book that has a very similar concept or is targeting a very similar demographic of readers, it wouldn't be a good idea for us to publish both books, because those 2 books would be competing against each other for sales, and that would probably end up damaging the sales of both books. So we want to make sure that the books that we do publish, we're not going to torpedo it ourselves by publishing something similar. So that's often a reason why it could be the wrong publisher for your book. Also, it could be a question of resource. If we've taken on a book that we've already invested a huge amount of our marketing budget in, and there's just not going to be the amount that we would like to dedicate to your book at that time, again, it would be doing you a disservice to take it on, because we always have to make financial calculations as part of our decision-making process about how we can actually really break out a book and make it work commercially, and sometimes we just don't have enough that we can invest in it at any particular time. Which brings me on to wrong time. Sometimes market trends can really affect our decision-making process around submissions. There are certain trends that are massively popular. If your book is dealing with a really zeitgeisty topic, that can really work in your favour. But sometimes if you submit a novel at a time when a trend is tailing off, for example, psychological thrillers can be really, really difficult to break out sometimes, and it takes quite a special concept to really have the potential to sell, because there have been so many bestsellers in that area recently, and that for that reason it's more difficult at the moment to get a deal for a psychological thriller than, say, a historical novel, which historical novels are booming at the moment. This obviously changes from year to year, so it's a good idea when you're doing your market research before you're submitting to just have a look at the Sunday Times bestseller list and see what kinds of books are doing really well at the moment. What books am I not seeing on these lists? And sometimes, you know, if your book is completely different to everything that's on the list, that can be a good thing, but often it's not, because often it means that that it's just not a very popular time for the type of genre that you're writing in. And of course, the final reason that your manuscript might not be accepted for submission is because something about your pitch wasn't wasn't quite right, and you just need a bit more time honing your pitch, and maybe you need a bit more time honing your book as well. But that is not to say that it will never happen, and a no now from one publisher does not mean never. It often takes quite a long time to get that publishing deal, but I hope that's been helpful, just to see that there are so many reasons that a manuscript might be rejected, and a lot of the time it really doesn't, it's really not about just the quality of your writing. So yeah, my piece of advice here is to really keep the faith when you're going through the submissions process. I know that's easier said than done, but it's really important to remember that every single best-selling and prize-winning author has received multiple rejections. And also, I think it's worth bearing in mind that being published by a traditional publisher is not the only measure of success. A lot of writers publish themselves independently, really successfully, and if in your heart of hearts you know that actually your book, a book that you've written that you really love, is you've written it sometimes for yourself or for friends and family, that's fine too. It doesn't need to be on a bookshop shelf to do what you want it to be. Sometimes a book is just a really important stepping stone in your journey of personal development as a writer and as an artist. Sometimes a book can be an important cathartic or therapeutic exercise for you to work through something in your life, and sometimes it can be something that is really tailored to something that your close-knit family and friends will enjoy. And yeah, I would stress that the getting published by a traditional publisher isn't the only success. Writing a book is a massive achievement, guys. I couldn't do it. I don't know how you do it. There are so many words and so many ideas on every page of a book, and I really applaud anybody who has written a book. And it's also important to bear in mind that getting published is not the final destination. after you get your book deal, you're just going to be stressed about what your editors' edits are going to look like. Then you're going to be stressed about what the reviews look like. It doesn't sort of, the journey to getting published doesn't end with like a complete lack of stress. Your career as a writer is long, and it doesn't end with that first publishing contract. I think that resilience is really important in this process, because like I said, I know that writing a book is really emotionally demanding, and perhaps more so than any other art form, I think. And a tip that I'd like to give writers to keep themselves resilient and feeling good about themselves during that querying and submissions process is to remember to reward yourself for the achievements that you've made, and also just give yourself a break every now and then. If there's a manuscript that you've worked really hard on, but it hasn't found a home yet, it's really important to just put it in a drawer every now and then, work on something different, just to get your creative juices flowing, and to remind yourself that even though you've spent so much time on this piece of work, it is not the sum of your career as a writer or your value as a writer. And the nature of being a writer is that you have a lot of stories ahead of you to tell. So alternating between rewarding yourself and acknowledging your achievements, and also just giving yourself a bit of a break, is really important. And I think I've got a little GIF to illustrate that. Make sure you celebrate yourselves, guys. And I think that's the end of my talk, but if you have questions, thoughts, feelings, please do fire away. Shall I stop share for this bit, Sarah?
Yeah, if that's all right, that'd be great. Yeah. If it's all right, I've got a couple of quick questions that were sent in, and then obviously if people have got questions, they can pop them in the chat as well. That would be grand. Obviously you covered some of them, like location, so you're particularly looking for people who are based in the north, and region-wise, people can look at the Arts Council website. That's a really good, they define the north with a kind of a line in all the regions, so that's a good place to look. What about people who are in the north and writing stories that are based in the south? I know Saltwater's a good example of this, because Jessica Andrews is from the north, but it's in the north and it's in the south, and it does a bit of everything, but it's classed as a northern novel, isn't it?
Yeah, you do not have to set your novel in any particular place. We publish novels set in Sicily and America and anywhere. We want to be really clear that we're not sort of restricting freedom of movement for northern writers. So if you're originally from the north but now you live in the south, that's absolutely fine. And equally, if you are resident in the north but you're originally from somewhere else, that's fine. And the content of your book does not need to be specifically northern. It can be whatever it is that you're writing. And there are a couple of other questions I spotted. We do, did someone ask about Wales? I think somebody did. Yeah, we cover North Wales, we cover Scotland, Northern Ireland, and the Midlands as well. And oh, okay, so we don't actually publish poetry. There are some really great indie presses in the north that publish poetry. Carcanet is one of them. Off the top of my head, People Tree Press also publishes poetry.
Nine Arches as well. There's quite a big list. Yeah, I tend to share them quite a lot studio wise, so I'll share a few of those on Twitter later on. Yeah,
great. And a question about YA. Yes, okay, so we don't publish YA, but there is another imprint of HarperCollins called Harper Voyager that specialises in YA, sci-fi and fantasy, and they're really keen to find more writers based in the north. So if you send your submission to our inbox, but clearly signpost it in the subject line for Harper Voyager, we can pass it on to them for you, whether you have a literary agent or not.
That's brilliant. Book club
Ooh,
books as genre.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. So book club fiction is generally fiction that is accessible enough to have a really broad appeal, and fiction that is going to spark debate and make you want to often these books are what we call issues led. The concept of the novel revolves around a social issue that is going to spark debate. And if there's a book that just makes you want to argue with your friends, that's book club fiction.
Can you think of any title examples? I'm trying to think off the top of my head.
Yeah, so it can cross various different genres. So an example of the book club fiction can be a thriller, like My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell.
Yeah.
It can be a historical novel, like, oh, do you know what? I've got quite a lot of book club fiction on my shelves, so I'll just have a look. This is an example of a contemporary book club novel, So Lucky by Dawn O'Porter. Have I got a historical one? I'm sure I do somewhere. Can't find one. But if you look at the website for Richard and Judy's book club, there are lots of examples there. Also, Reese Witherspoon has a book club called Reese's Picks, and that should give you a broad overview of the many different kinds of books that can be classed as book club fiction.
Brilliant. Before I go back into the chat, there was another question about where people should start when they're finding looking for publishers. And I normally, wait there, I should have brought it over. Show everyone my comfortable Zoom trousers. I normally use the Writers and Artists Yearbook. Obviously, buy a newer one because some of these publishers might not exist. But is there anything else you would recommend starting when people are looking for publishers?
That's a really good one. Keep an eye on Society of Authors socials as well. The Society of Authors is there to give advice, but I think the Writers and Artists Yearbook is the best one, really.
And libraries quite often have those as well, so you don't necessarily have to buy it every year.
Oh, that's good to know.
I quite often look in the library for the most current one.
At my previous job, the Writers and Artists Yearbook printed my direct line phone number by accident in the book, so I got about 10 phone calls a day from authors from everywhere just wanting to pitch me their books. But I was actually working in a publisher that didn't accept unagented submissions at the time, so it was horrible. I kept having to just say, I'm sorry, you've got the wrong number.
100 times. Oh no. Christine has asked if autofiction's still popular.
Oh, yes. I'd say autofiction is really popular in literary fiction. I've worked on quite a lot of autobiographical novels, and it just seems to keep going and going. It's quite an interesting concept though, because a lot of fiction is obviously based on real life experience. So I think the line between memoir and fiction is getting harder and harder to define.
Jode asked if Harper Voyage is just YA or sci-fi and fantasy.
All sci-fi and fantasy, and all kinds of YA as well.
Cool. Brilliant. Thank you.
Ooh. Okay, Josh, we've got detailed instructions on our website. The process is ever so slightly different between fiction and non-fiction, but I think addressing you can have a look on our website we've got our individual biographies, which tells you a little bit more about our specific remits. So we also, our publishing director Genevieve also publishes fiction, and our taste overlaps a lot, but Jen tends to publish more things that are the very, very, very commercial end of what we do, and I tend to do things that are a little bit more at market, and we both just sort of do everything in between. So it doesn't really matter which one of us you address the email to. It could be Meg, me, or Jen, but if you did want to have a look at the website and you see one of us who you think is the best fit for you, then do pop our names in the email.
The useful thing that you have on the website as well, you have the guidelines for submitting non-fiction, and I quite often direct people here because it's a really good guide on what's expected from a non-fiction proposal. So if you go to the Harper North contact page, non-fiction guidelines, and that gives you a really good rundown of what a non-fiction proposal should look like as well. That's super duper useful, actually. So,
oh, thanks for the endorsement.
it's excellent. It's really, really good. Davina, would you be interested in character-led novels with the protagonist being from a minority background?
Definitely. Yes, please.
Cool.
That was a short answer, but
yes. More of that, please. And Christina's got another one there as well.
Okay. So you've read that comps need to be from books published in the last 3 years. For anyone who doesn't know what a comp is, it's short for comparison title, and it means a book that you're comparing to your own as part of a pitch. So it is a good idea to use books that have been published relatively recently as comps, but I think 3 years is a little bit strict. I'd say 10 years. And it should be a book that was successful. It doesn't need to be a bestseller, it doesn't need to be a prize winner, but it should definitely be a book that, you know, received a fair amount of coverage and that a lot of people have heard of. That can be quite difficult to gauge if you don't have access to the actual sales figures for the books. But another useful signpost is if it has been promoted in a book club, if it's been Waterstones Book of the Month, if it's on the shelf in any supermarket, definitely a good comp, because it's quite difficult to get supermarkets to sell books. So, you know, any book selling in a supermarket is selling well.
And booksellers are good as well, only because I used to work as a bookseller.
Yeah.
Ask booksellers what they're reading and what they love and what's been really popular as well, because that's a good guide.
Yeah, that's a really good idea.
Popular. And they love to talk about what they're reading. They really do. There was one more little question which you kind of covered earlier on, but obviously you can do direct submissions to yourself. Do people still need, would you advise them to secure an agent, or are you comfortable just publishing people without?
We are 100% comfortable publishing people without an agent. We have no preference whatsoever whether you have an agent or not. It's really your personal preference. We receive loads of agented submissions and loads of unagented submissions, and we've offered contracts to lots of people without agents.
Brilliant. Lovely. Has anyone else got any burning questions for Daisy? Oh, shaking heads.
Any questions for our head of marketing, Alice?
Oh yes, Alice is still here.
Actually,
I was going to ask, there was one other little question that I'd written down about social media profile. Is it essential that people have a profile before they start as an author? Because some people don't like social media at all. Is that crucial, or is it a...
Oh, I'm not sure.
Sorry, Alice, hold on. I'll control for there. Hold on, I'm coming. Where are you? There you are. Sorry, Alice, there you go. You should be able to unmute now.
Hiya. Hello, everybody. Do you know what? I wasn't planning to speak. But,
sorry, Alice, I talked to you.
Never mind. I'm always happy to say things. So hello, everybody. I look after marketing and publicity at Harper North, and on Twitter, I am at Alice Murphy Pyle. So in terms of social media, funnily enough, I was asked this question last week. I was doing something for Curtis Brown, and I'm going to give you the same answer, which is, like, to be really, really honest, it's good to have a platform just to show that you've got like some awareness of how to speak to people. It's not that you have to have a massive audience, but just like any understanding whatsoever of like the wider world, just because like, you know, you don't have to have a newsletter, although a newsletter is really nice. It's just good to be able to show that you can talk about yourself in a way that is in some way kind of useful to readers. So for example, some people feel like they need to have a platform on every social media site, and like obviously TikTok is massive at the moment. Like if you're not into TikTok, just leave it. But I always say to authors, particularly shy authors, like do one but do it well. And of all of them, Twitter is the one that is kind of industry focused, so there's loads of agents on there, and they'll say, you know, oh, I'm looking for like a ghost story for this year, and that's a really, really good way of kind of meeting agents and just seeing that actually they're not like really scary people, they're just like, you know, anybody else. But Facebook, when, you know, maybe when you are coming to publication time, particularly if you're maybe looking down alternative routes, so like self-publishing, which is quite profitable, Facebook is a really good way of building your own audience and advertising yourself. So I know, you know, you can do advertising to your own followers and video advertising as well, much easier on Facebook. So the other thing I was just going to slightly, not exactly disagree with Daisy on, but just to like just be really like super clear, just in case it's not like very obvious, is that because Harper North is a trade publisher, and by that it means that we're like, you know, we sell it, our books are sold in like supermarkets and in Waterstones, so we're sometimes, you know, we're not necessarily looking at authors with a social media platform that's like in the thousands. It's just like, we just like to see a bit of personality, but there's you know, there's obviously very well established northern publishers of all different stripes. But I think one of the things that is new about Harper North that there hasn't been in the north is that we haven't had a trade publisher in the north. So there are, you know, so many like avant-garde publishers and poetry publishers and, you know, very literary publishers that do absolutely amazing work. But what Harper North is a trade publisher, which means like, you know, our books are not like bleeding edge experimental. They're books that you might find in a bookshop or in a supermarket. So it's just a tiny difference, but I wouldn't, you know, I know we've been quite like careful to make sure that we're not like, we're bringing literacy to the north, because there's such a gap between the amazing amount of talent in the north and actually getting that talent towards the moment of publication. Yeah, so that I just wanted to make that distinction as well, which I think Daisy did, but I just wanted to explicitly say it.
Yeah, thanks, Alice.
Thank you. It's funny, we can hear you, Alice, but your video has disappeared, so I don't know where you've gone, but you're there somewhere.
Oh,
I can see.
Oh, that's all right. It must just be me. Lovely. I realise we're just after 7 now, so some people are having to go.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, if anybody,
no,
I'll just answer. Do you want me to answer these couple on here, Sarah?
If you've got time, that would be brilliant.
Yeah, if anybody needs to go, like please go. And also like ask us either on Harper North. Like one of the things that we're desperate to do is just like break down some of the like barriers to communication. So either ask us on like DM us on Twitter, or just ask me, or drop me an email. I'll put my email address in here as well, and I'm sure Daisy.
Oh yeah, I'll do the same.
So blogs and WordPress, like I always love reading people's blogs, and it's a good discipline as well. You know, just keep you writing and keep you you know, keep you going on as you know, kind of come up towards publication. That's something that's quite useful to somebody else. Somebody else said, if you're coming from a different discipline and already have socials, I don't think you need to have two unless you really want to. So some authors who say, if you write you know, in a totally different genre, so I know some authors have like a romantic fiction name and a sci-fi name or an erotica name. Some people like to keep them separate. Some people say, you know, like XYZ writing as ABC in their socials. So if you're known by two names, I think it's fine to have both.
Brilliant. There was one more from Carmen, and I'm trying to find it. Where's it gone? Question about packaging a Northern writer. Oh, packaging us up, lovely. Difficulties of getting book into people's hands. How much involvement can the writer play in supporting at this stage, especially when the writer's from underrepresented groups and may have old ideas on how to reach an audience?
Do you want to take that one, Alice, or shall I?
Shall I start and you can pick up?
Yeah,
if that's useful. So I think authors can be like, you know, you guys are the ones with the authorial talent, so you know, you play a massive role in the success of a book. And obviously, for example, I look after all marketing and all publicity for Harper North, so even though I absolutely love, you know, our authors and our books, like I only have like quite a small amount of time on each book, so it realistically is like the 6 weeks around publication that I'm actively, you know, going out to journalists, and, you know, if there's an opportunity, being like, oh, what about this person? So we publish probably 30 or 40 books a year at the moment, so I look after publicity and marketing with a couple of freelancers, but I do the bulk of it on my own. So what is amazing and you know, really drives like what's called the long tail, which means books that just tick on and sell, is when authors are like able to spot an opportunity. So our author Brian Groom, who's just done a book called Northerners: A History, so I think he's Groom B on Twitter. He is a journalist, which does give him contacts, but he is just like taking it upon himself to absolutely boss like all his events. So when we spoke to him last summer, I said, oh, you know, maybe doing some events, and he literally went away and organised 40 events up and down the north, and that's always really useful when people kind of work with me. And then it meant that, okay, I can concentrate on speaking to journalists and getting reviews. And for example, with Brian, we've done window clings, which are those things that, you know, they're like plastic things that go in the windows of bookshops. So because he's been looking after one area, I've done another. But even when I worked, like before I did this job, I worked at Penguin Random House for 6 years, and I was on a team of 12 marketeers and 11 publicists. And even then, you know, authors who were interested and, you know, were kind of asking and suggesting themselves and putting themselves forward. I remember one of my authors who is amazing. She did she was a women's fiction author, and she ended up on Radio 4 talking about the Booker Prize one night, because she just, you know, was like what my dad would call like Johnny on the spot, and was like, I'll talk about the Booker Prize. So people who put themselves out there are really useful. So yeah, it's definitely good to have people who are kind of aware.
I think you've covered it there. I don't have anything to add.
Brilliant.
Oh, and can an author hire their own comms and marketing team? Oh, God, absolutely. Like, it's partly what you get from working with a big publisher is that they, you know, they have an in-house team, but you know, absolutely lots of people work with either freelance publicists or marketers, either around the time of publication just to give that extra boost, or sometimes if that, you know, after the first wave, when they're trying to drive that long tail, that's really useful to have a freelancer as well. But you can always do it yourself too. You know, I suppose the thing that is helpful with a publicist is having the contacts. But it is really useful to have a freelancer if you want to, but obviously that would be something that you'd cover yourself.
Thank you. Thank you both so much for that. I feel like I could keep thinking of questions, but I'm not going to, because we'll know where to find you if we need you. And like I say, people can come through me, through you, whatever you want to. We'll always try and answer your questions. I'm really grateful for your time. It's been really interesting. I've made stacks of notes for me as a writer as well, and that I can pass on to everyone. So thank you both very much, and thank you to everyone for coming and for your lovely questions as well.
Oh, thanks for coming, everyone. And yeah, drop us an email, find us on Twitter, and stay in touch.
Hopefully you'll have a little flurry of submissions.
Yeah.
Lovely. Thanks so much, everyone. So this is recorded, so I'll share it as soon as I've got everything sorted out. But thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the evening, and see you all soon.
Have a nice evening, everyone. Bye.